Welcome to Golf and the Good Life, your guide to golf travel across the pond. I'm DJ Jones, he is Connor Evers, and today we are talking about 2026 golf trips to Scotland, Ireland, and beyond. Connor, we are right in the midst of the holiday season. Looking forward to seeing everyone at HQ here in a little bit of time. But before we get to today's episode, what is the latest up there in Cincinnati?
Deej, appreciate the intro. All is good here at HQ. And as you said, in the midst of the holiday season and the 2025 golf travel season just keeps itching a little bit sooner, as well as we are in the midst of kind of getting more plans and what have you for the PGA show coming in the end of January, which is great, but all good. And then, as we'll talk about today, 2026 travel plans and logistics and what have you, that timetable is just moving a little bit quicker as well. So we're just looking forward to getting up and all those details and looking forward to chatting about today as well. And I feel like in these last few episodes we've done like a reading update, what we're kind of reading more specific to golf. And our colleague Whitney Hedrick was and a few of us were over at the Elevate event, and she met with the club Montrose. So I've got this book, can't see it, Deej, on Zoom, but it's called Golf of Montrose, the history of the fifth oldest golf course in the world. So it's about, I would say, a couple 250 pages, and it's just the intimate history of the club, how it was built. There's a lake, here, what they did with it. They talk about how much a pint of a lager was, back then and what it is now. It's just a really cool book. I'm super into that. I just love how like club history evolves over time, and specifically about a place that some of our travelers will go to, not all the time, but a club like that, especially the fifth oldest, which is cool. So I'm looking forward to getting more involved in that book. But I'm about halfway through it. So
That's great stuff. And you're right. I think we had a group, or maybe it was a group of yours,
it
either
was.
this year or last year, that played Montrose. And if memory serves, I feel like they've actually been in the news here recently because they're experiencing some big time erosion from some of
Correct.
these storms they're going through. So, great read. I'll have to grab it with a couple days while I'm up at HQ and flip through it. But shifting back to today's episode, we're talking about 2026, and yes, we realize it's not even 2025 yet, at least as this comes out. But, as we have sort of repeated numerous times here on the podcast, obviously early planning is absolutely essential these days for numerous reasons that we're going to cover a lot of today. And if you're in the process of thinking about a trip for 2026, or maybe your plan for 2025 didn't come together and you've already punted to next year, if you haven't started, especially if you're wanting to play some of the marquee places, you're a little behind in the count. Now is the time to get going, as we're going to cover. But I'm going to kind of try to take a little bit more of a almost more of a moderator type standpoint today, because Connor, between you and Chris and Mike, you guys have the goods in terms of what's coming. So let's start with a little bit of what's your feel in terms of 2026. Obviously, it's been a crazy few years in terms of demand and how busy it's been. Is there more of that coming? Are you seeing anything that's different? What's the outlook for 26?
Yeah, similarities, but also differences. It's definitely going to be still a busy year, extremely busy, especially with the Open Championship at Royal Portrush coming back since 2019. So that's going to be really fun, obviously, to watch. But there's going to be a lot of interest of folks. Again, I've said this multiple times. The TV cover just does a really good job of saying the area, especially in the Open and just the club. So it's going to be really busy for 2026, specifically up in Northern Ireland. But the one thing I've seen the most is in past few years, as someone wants the specific trip of, say, St. Andrews and East Lothian, of Old Course Guaranteed and Muirfield, and if they come to us a little bit later, we explain it, and a lot of times we'll go to a different area, say Highlands and Aberdeen. What I've been seeing, and what we've been seeing a lot more, is folks wait until next year for 2026 planning and get that perfect trip rather than going off and doing something just a little bit different. So that's what I'm seeing. I think that's going to spark a lot more interest and just busier at a lot of the more marquee courses such as Old Course, Muirfield, Portrush, Royal County Down for 2026, just comparatively to other years. That's kind of the other difference that I would see from that standpoint. The other thing I would say is a lot of other clubs outside of the Big Four, which we'll talk about, and again, Big Four would be St. Andrews, Muirfield, Royal Portrush, and Royal County Down. is a lot of the tee sheets are opening up sooner and sooner. A lot of other clubs outside of even those four are taking bookings for just holding those bookings earlier on. Other courses, such as Tralee, we just got an email from them today that they're opening up a little bit earlier too. So it's the timeline of things, even outside of those big four, are just moving earlier and earlier. And it's again another reason why you should hire a golf travel agency such as us, Haversham and Baker, to take care of those logistics for you, because we know the ins and outs and know what to expect to make sure you get what you want. So those are kind of the similarities, but also differences, just kind of looking at the big picture for 2026 planning.
Well, that's great insight. And you talked about the Open Championship and returning to Port Rush and so forth. And there was a time when most golf travel planning began as soon as the Open was over for that year prior.
Yeah.
So as soon as the last putt was held in 2025, we would have sent out an email to all of our, past travelers and so forth. Now is the time to plan for 2026. If we did that today, oh my goodness, we would be in trouble because, by the time the Open starts in July, Royal Port Rush and the other clubs, they're basically gonna be off the table for you, is really what it comes down to, and a lot of it has to do with what you were just saying about the earlier shift in the calendar. These experiences are all scarce because, again, they're private clubs, limited availability. It's not like going to Bandon or Pinehurst where the tee sheet is wide open for you because it's a resort. But as those tee sheets have opened earlier, people who were accustomed to planning in May, June, July are saying, "What do you mean they're sold out?" And so it fuels the scarcity even more earlier because, well, now, okay, if I can't do my trip this year, let's get started for next year. And so it kind of just feeds on itself is what we've been in. You talked about, the marquee courses. So let's kind of start with the old course. Tell me if I've kind of got this right, and then you can sort of walk us through if where I may have missed it. So, as an authorized provider of guaranteed tee times, H&B, will likely receive our allocation late Marchish is kind of the timeline. Straight up, those times, the moment they arrive, almost all of them, if not all of them, are already sold because, like we were just saying, the group that maybe struck out or started late the year before has already been sort of in the queue and that sort of thing. So then if you don't have that option, you've got the Swilken package, used to be known as the direct application, and that will open in September and then for play in 2026. So the September 2025, you'll throw in your application, you'll get a result in October. The downside of that is if you've waited to do that, of course, you're going to probably strike out with a guaranteed tee time because now we're into October and good luck finding one at that point. Is that kind of the gist of St. Andrews still for 26? Any other changes that you're seeing?
No, exactly. I mean, I think you said it perfectly. I mean, St. Andrews does a really good job with kind of keeping the process the same from year to year. They don't really like to change things. The date of our allocation has gotten a little bit earlier, a couple of weeks earlier over the past few years. But other than that, no, you hit on the nail on the head, Deej. And kind of mentioned there too is like avoid September, just with from the standpoint of the RNA has some closures for their medal play as well as some meetings, and in the back end of the month there's a Dunhill links as well. Still receive some guaranteed times in the month, but it is very limited. And also at Swilken package, they do not take any applications for that month. It's just completely blocked off for that whole month for the Swilken package as well. So just a couple of things to add there, but did it perfect. You should just take my job, Deej.
Well, there you go. Well, but a good point though that you just added about September. Besides the RNA, if you even have September in your mind, even though there are some dates where it's open, if you're hoping to do a Swilken package or an application for September, just it's kind of off the table for you, which is interesting. So okay, so that's the old course, and of course, St. Andrews is the driver of so much of this. Let's talk a little bit about the other three of the big four. And of course, we're talking Old Course, Muirfield, Royal County Down, Royal Port Rush. Huge year ahead for Royal Port Rush. The demand is absolutely certain to skyrocket around the Open Championship. What's it looking like then beyond that into 26, where you know obviously all those people watching are then going to be wanting to play it?
Yeah. Yeah. So in Northern Ireland, as you mentioned, in Port Rush, it's going to be pretty fairly busy. For 2026 bookings, as we kind of mentioned there, Portrush is going to be very early when they open. March 3rd is when they'll open officially and start sending out confirmations, which is crazy, but it will be March 3rd. And then next door, obviously, a lot of groups will like to pair Royal County down with that. They'll open up about a month later, which is April 1st. So to pair both of those are kind of your dates there. If things stay the same, which I know they will, just with the interest that we're seeing, and even more, I believe from 2026 comparatively to 25 or even 24, it's going to be really busy, and those times are going to go extremely quickly from that standpoint. And to go back over to Scotland, the last fourth there would be Muirfield. Muirfield will open on February 24th, so that's going to be one of the earliest ones. And again, it's the application process. You can go back to our past episode last year about 2025 trips, kind of the change on the application there. But that's kind of the process. And just a kind of a more general thing, I just had a group that applied for a time for next year for 2025 in August. And again, we applied for them back in February. They were waitlisted from February until about 2 weeks ago, and they just actually got their tee time through. So that just shows of how busy it is. But also, there's always a chance. You just have to be patient with it. So again, I just had that in there multiple months later, got that tee time confirmed, and it's just an incredible trip. But that's kind of everything that you need to do from a date standpoint for the Big Four.
That's absolutely unbelievable about that group still getting a time that came through. I mean, can you imagine if you think, oh, my trip's not happening, or we're not playing our marquee course on our
Right.
trip, we're making these other plans, and then boom, like you just, it's like the time I had a text come from Ticketmaster for Taylor Swift tickets 3 days before the show. You just never know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
But I think one thing that maybe it doesn't need to be said, but I'm going to say it anyway. As we're talking about all of these dates, April 1st, March 3rd, February 24th, late March, those are 2025 dates for play in 2026. So if you're thinking we're talking about 2026 and planning in 2026, no, these are dates that are just literally weeks and months away. Probably didn't need to clarify that, but we did it anyway. But, back to the Big Four aspect. I mean, yes, those 4 courses drive a lot, but obviously there's dozens and dozens of other courses across Great Britain and Ireland that are, driving the demand, so many of the top 100 courses and so forth. And, it's interesting because once you kind of nail down those must play courses that you're wanting to play, okay, you've got your Muirfield. Well, now you got to get North Berwick. Or you've got your Royal Troon. Well, now you better go get Prestwick or Royal Dornoch. Just in general, the demand for there, with it being a top 10 course in the world these days, it's not just the Big Four. You've really got to look at the whole picture. Your work is not anywhere near done just because those 4 courses. I mentioned just now a few. Any other spots where, okay, you've got the one piece of the puzzle, but sometimes you can struggle with somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say I would add in North Berwick, as you mentioned there. They're going to be April 1st, so right around that same time frame. I mean, Carnoustie with the old course, once you have that as well. Kingsbarn's a little bit easier. They have just full tee times. I don't have members of the club, so it's regular tee times. From there, I mean, Port Stewart as well up in Northern Ireland. Southwest is a whole nother ball game on that standpoint too of Ireland, but I would add in North Berwick for sure too.
So let's hit on Southwest though, because we haven't talked about it,
Yeah.
and obviously there's a half dozen top 100 courses down there. You've got Adair Manor that's hosting the
Right.
Ryder Cup in 2027. Is it maybe a touch more relaxed than some of these other areas, or do you got to be on it just as early?
I think you got to be on it as early as you can too. I mean, I just mentioned too. I mean, we literally just got an email from Trey Lee that said, "Hey, we're gonna start holding tee times." They're not sending confirmations out. They don't even know about their blackout dates or anything, but they are able to hold a tee time for 2026. The timeline just keeps moving earlier and earlier, and as much as it is sometimes it's annoying, and it is, but it is what it is. It's just with demand of. I don't know too many of those more specifics with Southwest. It's usually Scotland first, then it moves to Ireland. But I will say, I think things are going to move quicker where the Scotland and Ireland parts are going to be all working kind of in conjunction with each other. Because we always feel like the rush comes first with Scotland. There's a little bit of a break. Then the rush comes with Ireland, Northern Ireland. Then there's a break. Then it's Southwest. It's one of those things. I would say it's a little bit more relaxed. It's kind of hard to tell exactly now. Scotland just comes out with more specific dates earlier than Ireland does. So at the current moment, just don't know too many more specifics, but we'll keep everyone updated.
Well, it's interesting, going back to the selling season used to not start
Mm,
until the Open.
hmm.
It's almost now, so you would have your travel season for the current year, and then you'd start selling, say halfway or almost through the travel season of that year for the next year.
Yeah.
Well, now it's almost completely inverted. The
Hmm.
selling is all happening for 2 seasons out
Yeah.
before the season you're in even starts.
Hmm.
And that's wild. Especially for folks where you've already got a trip on the books,
Yeah. Yeah.
going to them and saying, "Hey, if you are wanting to go again in 2026, now's the time to get going." It's hard to think about your next trip before you've even taken the one trip that's on the book. So I understand the challenge that we've had and that I think the industry has had in terms of getting that early booking message across.
Yeah, and we've had multiple conversations about this, just kind of trends in just the industry, and maybe this isn't specific for 26, but it's just like we're seeing more trips on kind of every other year, and it's just to that standpoint, it's hard to put a deposit down on a trip when you haven't even paid your second or third deposit on the trip you're about to go in the
Sure.
following year. It's just and I completely understand that. If I was the consumer from the other side of the table, I would probably have not an issue with it, but it would just be a little weird. So I get that. And kind of back to Southwest more specifically too. I mean, Adair is going to have the Ryder Cup in 2027, and each year they have limited play on the course too. I don't know what that's going to look like for 2026. For 25, you have to stay on property to play the golf course, and there's also limited times as well. So I have no clue for 2026. I mean,
Sure, it's an ever evolving thing, and but again, that's why you have a expert in your back pocket that's there to manage it for you. And then, the other thing that's happening as well, aside from all of this, demand stuff that we keep, harping on, you've got some new places that are absolutely going to drive interest. Top of that list obviously has to be Old Petty that's opening at Cabot Highlands, the new Tom Doak course. They're opening for preview play here at the end of 2025, but in terms of first season where they're at full tilt and it's kind of a full-blown thing is gonna be 2026, and you better believe the line is gonna be out the door in terms of trying to get into the place. So, just one more thing to factor in, especially, talking about Dornick earlier, pairing those 2 things, you've got 3 courses between those 2 and the one at Dornick to work around. So it's just another piece to the puzzle. And then Trump International has a new course that's set to debut at some point. Machrihanish Dunes has potentially a second course that's on the way. I'm not sure if they've broken ground, but it was approved. So there's a lot of stuff happening, and all of those things are going to only add to the interest and the demand and so forth. Because it's funny, it's like you said with the TV. Every time golf is on television in Scotland, or there's an article in XYZ magazine about Scotland or Ireland or wherever it might be, we talked about Critch Island being on the cover of Golfer's Journal. Every one of those things sparks interest to some level. So, if you're ahead of the crowd, then all is good. Okay, so we've talked about kind of the main areas and some dates to look out for. Any other things that are happening, other than the Open Championship and so forth, that to plan around for 26?
sure. Yeah, I'll go through these. I'm going to go. They're not going to be in logistical order from country to country. I'm going to kind of bop around, but I'll go through them fairly quickly and go from there. So Royal St. George's, they're changing their visitor policy for 2026. They're actually adding Wednesdays for 3 and 4 ball bookings, which is nice. The 2 ball bookings will stay the same for Monday and Thursday. So just adding another day, which is great down in the area. The biggest change I would say probably to anything for 2026 that I've seen so far is Royal County Down. They're actually not allowing 36 whole days in the championship course anymore. I think it's just to be a little bit more diplomatic, have more groups play the course. Our travelers love that 36 whole day, so it will be a little bit different. You do want to have a 36 whole day, maybe enjoy the Ansley course or a different place outside of Newcastle. Maybe if you want to play it twice, just 2 days in a row as well. So that's kind of a big change from that standpoint. We talked about North Berwick again, April 1st, when that'll open up. the Lahinch is hosting the Walker Cup in 2026. So that the Walker Cup will be played on the 5th and 6th of September of 2026. Don't know the exact closures yet. I'm sure there's going to be practice rounds beforehand, maybe a media day or some sorts after. So don't really know the dates. But again, the 5th and 6th of September. And always the Lahinch also has their member festival and a couple of member guests and stuff. So, and then that's in August. So August and then into kind of about the second week of September. So it's going to be a little bit barren. So just keep folks updated on that. Around usually the Open Championship date in 2025, that's probably when the 2027 Open Championship venue will be announced. That's usually how it works. So we'll see. So, Deej, I think that's kind of all I have for kind of notable dates and things around. I'm sorry I kind of bumped around everywhere throughout each country, but those were just some notable things I wanted to mention. And as we'll kind of go through, we'll keep the listeners updated once we know some more specifics for 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like you say, there's so many little things that add up. And again, going back to, these are also for the most part private clubs. And so not only do you have like events that you're working around, but you've got random member events, member guests, like you said, random scratch plays and that sort of thing. And so that availability, that from an American golfer's standpoint, where we're used to, at least if we're going somewhere on this side of the pond, we're used to a resort with, multiple courses and a wide open tee sheet and so forth. And it's just not how it works over there. And that's the kind of the one of the key things to know going in. The other is that it's not just about golf, right? I mean, you've got to get the tee times. I mean, that's why you're going. So that's the driver of it all. But the other key components, you've got accommodations and transportation. Where are you going to stay and how are you going to get around? It's also not just an unlimited supply of these things. And the prime hotels in particular, for example, the Old Course Hotel, there's only 175 or so guest rooms. In the US, that would be considered a boutique property. In Scotland, it's quite large. But the point is that there's only so many of these rooms. There's only so many of those Old Course view rooms, at the Rusacks or whatever your desire is. You can't sleep on the other things as well. And so the earlier you can get the key pieces from a golf standpoint in place, then you can, obviously, knock those things out. If you got an expert that's doing it for you, those things are all happening in conjunction and so forth. But, on the transportation side, driver hosts, there's only so many of the great driver hosts, the guys who are going to be like your concierge on the trip. We're going to talk more about that type of stuff, maybe on a future episode. We've got a topic in mind for that. The key point, though, is that there's really three main prongs to this that you've got to get sorted: golf, lodging, transportation. But Connor, man, we covered some ground. That last bit you ran through, I felt like it was like I was playing Carmen Sandiego, when the video game where they used to show a screen and the plane would jump around the globe when you were bopping around GB and I know you have no idea what Carmen Sandiego is. He's shaking his head no, folks of those older millennials out there that know what I'm talking about. But any final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
I think we crushed it. And as I mentioned, things are always ever changing overseas, but there's also consistency of how things are also done. So we'll keep everyone updated if we have any more changes or just hear of anything. Man, if you are really looking at 2026, if this episode doesn't really just kind of motivate you to get going, I don't know what will. So best of luck to everyone when they're in those planning aspects. And if you are looking to go overseas, contact us and we'll be happy to help and get you off in the right direction.
Yeah, because before you know it, we'll be doing this episode again for 2027. So like you said, now is the time. But as usual, we're going to have some more guides related to this in the show notes. We actually already have a pretty in-depth guide on our website for 2026 that we'll link into there, as well as a few other resources. But if you've got any questions related to 2026 or really anything else, DM us on social media or send us an email, golf@haversham.com. But otherwise, thank you for tuning in. We will be back again soon with another episode. But until then, we wish you plenty of golf at its finest and life at its best.